project, the group of us did a little bit of initial looking into what were key Islamophobic organizations operating, pushing that Islamophobic agenda right now. So I'm going to hand it over to Kevin to talk a little bit about the types of organizations we're choosing to focus on. We're going to share a more detailed kind of research target list with you all later, but he's going to give a little intro to that.
Thanks, Molly, and thanks everyone for getting on. I think this is a super important and strategic project, and glad to be on the call with you all. So this is Kevin with LittleSis, and I'm going to talk, as Molly said, a bit about the target list that we compiled. It's important to note here, so when I say target list, we're talking about Islamophobic organizations that have as a primary or secondary purpose promoting Islamophobia. And I should note that the initial list, which numbers I think about 45 organizations at this point, was compiled really drawing on existing research, really excellent research that's been done by a number of different groups. You can see here noting Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE's work with a site called Islamophobia.org. The Center for American Progress put together a site called IslamophobiaNetwork.com that was put out a few years ago, but still has some relevant data. The Center for New Community has been putting out some really excellent timely reports on this issue in the Trump era. And then lastly, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which tracks hate groups, has compiled resources on this topic. So really important to note that the target list, the list of organizations, putting that kind of list together from scratch takes quite a bit of time. And so we were drawing on these really excellent existing resources that will be useful in the research on these organizations, as well as we kind of dig deeper on some of their connections. Just in terms of like the types of organizations we're talking about, there's kind of a broad range. We included on the list some funders of Islamophobic organizations. So some large foundations, some very large foundations that have Islamophobia as one of several different right-wing areas, or many different right-wing sort of program areas. Smaller family foundations that have this as a more core focus. Nonprofit organizations that again either have it as a core focus or something that they do as one of many different kind of right-wing agenda points. And then organizations that aren't necessarily formally incorporated. And on that last point, and I guess on all of these, with all of these types of organizations, results are going to vary in terms of what we're able to find about each type of organization. For some of the large foundations, for instance, there will be many dots to connect around them, board members, funders, et cetera. And then some of the smaller organizations at the other end of the scale are going to be a bit harder to sort of understand governance and funding and to follow the money up from those organizations. So even doing that kind of research can take a bit of time to sort of cull through the list. There will be some organizations where it will be hard to find much of anything, but we have them on the list now because that sort of process of identifying which organizations will be fruitful to research is, I guess, part of the research process. So yeah, that's a word on the target list. So in this next section, we're just going to give a bit of background about power research. What is power research? But then also talk a little bit about LittleSis as a tool for doing this kind of research. So power research, it's hard to define it without using the word power and research. Always a problem for us, but it's really investigative research focused on power structures. And when we talk about power, we have a sort of working definition of the ability of an individual or entity, the ability an individual or entity has to get what it wants, even against opposition, and to shape politics and society along their interests and priorities. And when we talk about power structure, we're talking about influential people, organizations, and relationships that compose a larger network. This kind of work is often done by activists and journalists challenging powerful institutions and kind of trying to understand, trying to go up the food chain from potentially what seems like a relatively small organization or grassroots organization that might actually be funded by larger corporate powers, billionaires, and people who really wield extraordinary influence over our economy and politics. Sometimes it's known as opposition research, muckraking, strategic research. I should note that we as an organization both conduct and facilitate research, power research around a range of different issues and industries. You can see a sample map on this page around Trump's Strategic and Policy Forum, which is actually a fancy name for his council of CEOs and billionaires that advise Trump on policy. And this is a map from LittleSis that shows some of the relationships, some of the corporate relationships behind those members of that council. So that's a bit about what power research is. It's not necessarily a common term, but it's all about following the money, connecting the dots, and really doing it for strategic purposes of doing the kind of campaign work that Socrates was talking about. It's necessary to do this kind of research to shape the strategy and sort of priorities of the campaign that you're working on. So now I'll hand it off to Molly to talk a little bit about LittleSis.
Cool. So one of the tools that we're going to be using for this project to kind of put all of the information that we're finding in one place and track the connections and connect the dots, like Kevin was saying, is LittleSis.org, which is a database that we oversee. And like I said, it's kind of the opposite of Big Brother. So instead of Big Brother looking down on all of us normal people, it's a community of activists, journalists, organizers, researchers that are looking up to track the connections between corporations, wealthy people, think tanks, all that kind of stuff. And so it's an online database. I'm going to show folks a little bit about how it works in a second. And it's a wiki. So just like Wikipedia, anyone can sign up for an account on LittleSis and start adding information to it. So it's totally free to sign up for, and it's crowdsourced. It depends on folks adding information to it to improve the data that we have on there. And we're using it for this project in particular because we're going to have a lot of people kind of taking different targets to research, and we want to have one central place where all that information is going. So both amongst us researchers who are going to be working on this together, we can see what people are finding and make connections between, oh, like this board member that I was looking at is actually also on the board of the organization you were looking at, so we're not duplicating work. And also so that we're making it accessible to activists and organizers that are going to be taking that information to challenge some of these players that are backing Islamophobia. So I'm going to navigate away from these slides real quick and begin sharing my screen so you all can see what LittleSis.org looks like. Cool. So can folks see my screen where it says LittleSis at the top of it?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
So if you go to LittleSis.org in your browser, you'll come up with this welcome page to LittleSis. And the first thing that you'll have to do is create a login by going to the sign up button here, and it'll take you through the instructions to do that. I should also say, we're going to send around a research guide after this call. So if you want to like take notes and make a note of what we're talking about, that's totally cool. But we're also going to send you around a guide that will go through all of this. So don't worry too much about getting every detail, but just kind of pay attention and see what we're doing. So you'll sign up there, and then once you have a username, you'll go to this little login button. My info is saved there, and you'll log in. And this is taking me to a dashboard that's kind of customized to my accounts in LittleSis and what I've been adding. So I'm going to show folks how to actually add information to the database a little bit later, but right now I'm going to show you how to search for information. And the way to do that is there's this search LittleSis bar at the top. It works just like an internal Google search would. You can search for a name, the name of a company, the name of a person, the name of a think tank, right up there. So for this example tonight, I'm going to use someone named Robert Mercer, who is a billionaire hedge fund manager who gave tons of money to Trump's campaign, is an investor, a major investor in Breitbart, the far-right news organization, and kind of is increasingly powerful in our country. So if I'm interested in figuring out what we have in LittleSis about him, I'm going to search for his name at the top here. And then it'll pull up, just like how Google would work, a bunch of different things in the database that have his name in them. So the first thing I'm going to click here is Entities, Robert Mercer. And it's basically going to take you to this profile page for him. So everyone who has been entered in LittleSis has a profile page that looks like this. And we can go over it kind of in more detail later, but it'll have a bunch of different information in there. So of course there's a little picture of him here. And then you'll see his name and a brief biography at the top. And then it's going to organize a bunch of relational information into little kind of bite-sized chunks in these tabs. So for example, here we have relationships, business positions. That's going to be kind of like, what's his day job? Where is he making his money? So we can see he's the co-chairman of a hedge fund that's called Renaissance Technologies. Holdings, so like I mentioned before, this is what he owns. He's an owner of Breitbart News. And it has a control in his hedge fund. There's a lot of different other categories like services and transactions, family members, who's in his family, professional associates, other folks who he's known to have key business relationships with, donations and grant recipients is who he's given money to. And each one of these pieces of information, because it's a wiki, has to be sourced back to a link. So if I want to know where did someone find out that he's an owner of Breitbart News, I'm going to click on this little smaller information there, and it'll show me a quote from an article where that was identified that someone put in, and then this source link that shows you the article where people found the information. So then I can click on that, and it'll take me to the article so I can double check it, so that I can make sure it's still up to date, all that kind of good stuff. And the way that LittleSis works is that it's kind of like a giant web. So, everything links to something else. So if I'm looking at his profile page here and I'm saying, oh, that's interesting, he has a family foundation, the Mercer Family Foundation. I want to know more information about that. I can click their name and it's going to take me to the page of the Mercer Family Foundation. And then we can see someone has added in information here about what they give money to. So if we want to see the full list of their grant recipients, again, the information is arranged in these little tabs that we'll show you guys more about in a second. And you can click, I want to see all of their recipients. And we can go through and look, see if there's anything that's interesting. The Manhattan Institute is kind of a well-known right-wing think tank. And we could click on these and see what they are. One that I wanted to call folks' attention to that we'll actually talk about in a little bit is his foundation actually gave, looks like $150,000 over the last couple of years to this group called the Gatestone Institute, which is actually on our target list of Islamophobic organizations. So you can see how we can start, following the money and following the web of relationships using LittleSis. There's a couple of other things I just wanted to bring to people's attention. So one is that there's a list feature that I alluded to in LittleSis that helps you kind of categorize information. And we put a list in here called Islamophobic organizations. So if I click that, this is our target list. and we'll make sure to send this around to folks so people have it, but this is the list of about 45 organizations that Kevin was mentioning that we've identified as being important Islamophobia promoting groups that we really want to understand more about. And some of these have very filled out profiles on LittleSis and others don't. So that's kind of where hopefully a bunch of you all are going to come in, is to start building out this information. The other two things I want to show folks a little bit about LittleSis is you can also make visual maps in it. So we were looking at Mercer before. If I search him, there's also these things that come up called network maps. And if I click that, there's a visual representation and including descriptions of how two of his kind of foundation funded front groups have just started attacking universal health care in New York. So again, if we're kind of thinking about the value of going up the food chain, of following the money, we've already seen pretty quickly that there's this one really powerful guy, Robert Mercer, who's connected to Breitbart, who's connected to Gatestone, which is a giant Islamophobic organization, and who's also attacking healthcare. And so you can start to think about kind of how knowing that could unlock organizing opportunities, could help build between movements that are working on universal healthcare and are combating Islamophobia, because we have kind of some opposition in common. So that's like a little bit about LittleSis, and we're going to show more later. So I'm going to throw it back to Kevin real quick to talk about, as we're thinking about kind of power mapping 101, if you have a person or an organization that you're like, I want to start digging in and understanding their networks, I don't know where to start, what kind of information you want to look for them. I'm going to go back to our slides over here.
Great, thank you, Molly. Let me, so, you know, just to note, to add on a bit to what Molly said about LittleSis, a lot of what we're going to be talking about is tracking relationships, and it's the kind of very heavily networked data that could fit in a Word document, a Google Doc that we collaborated on, or a spreadsheet, but actually really belongs in a database where we can create these linkages between entities, and also add source links so we know, where information is coming from. So it's a useful tool in that sense, as a kind of platform for this kind of research, collaborative research that really has this power mapping relational component to it. So just quickly, what do we want to know about these organizations and who has power in them? We're starting today with a real focus on the governance of these organizations, the board members that have ultimate governing authority over these nonprofits, whether they're bigger foundations, smaller foundations, or some of the other types of nonprofits I talked about. Looking at board members gives you a sense oftentimes of where organizations are getting their funding, gives you a sense of what kind of network the organization is in. It's not always necessarily enough though, so sometimes you have to look directly for funders. Where are the organizations getting their money? Both of those things, board members and funders, are really important kinds of research questions to look at in understanding who has ultimate sort of power over this organization, and where does the money go back to. And then additionally, key staff can be really important in understanding where an organization lies in a network. Oftentimes you have key staff moving between organizations in the same billionaires network. For instance, Steve Bannon, who's in the White House now, moved between or had multiple positions at organizations backed by Robert Mercer. So if we could just go to the next slide. When looking at a particular board member, and I should emphasize again, we're really starting with board members as a way to, just get started on the research. It's an entry point. It's not the only thing to look at, but we'll be getting to funding, et cetera, later. So taking a board member, you could get to the point where you've uploaded the board members for an organization, but you really might only have a list of names at that point. And it doesn't necessarily tell you much about where that board member is coming from. So the different types of relationships that we want to look at in this process are on your screen now if you're on a computer, but I'll go through them quickly. One is employment relationships, like work positions. This can include primary employment. It could include major contracts that the board member might have as a lawyer, as some kind of consultant. It might also include corporate board memberships. So what major corporations or privately held corporations are the board members also on the board of? There are nonprofit positions, so these could include board memberships or staff positions, philanthropy. So oftentimes board members of organizations might have their own family foundation or somehow be involved in funding or getting funding through philanthropy in different ways. Educational background can be important in understanding the sort of context someone is coming from. Campaign contributions and political allies. So there are tools on LittleSis for mapping federal campaign contributions. This can be really important as well, and just sort of understanding where someone's political alliances lie. Family, friends, colleagues, mentors, these social relationships that can play a really important role. And then investments. Where is their money actually invested? And there are various ways to investigate that. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at when we are looking at board members. And I believe Saqib is going to talk a bit about how to sort of prioritize some of this research, questions to guide your research as you go.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, so I mean, doing this research, you want to prioritize information that helps you answer some key questions, which are the ones that are on your screen. So there's, who are the key decision makers in the organization? Who influences those decision makers? What are their goals for their organization? What else do they care about outside of that organization? And who else has a problem with them? So the power mapping web that Kevin went through helps answer these questions. Sometimes you have to dig really deep before you start finding something. So you should let these questions be your guide. The thing is research is an iterative process. So going back to the power map on the previous screen, that means if you're researching someone and looking at all the nonprofit boards they sit on, and you don't see any red flags, well, the next cut is to look at those nonprofit organizations and do a power map of each of them, identifying key decision makers there, and then doing this entire map around those organizations. And so I think as you can actually keep going back and going deeper and deeper. Of course, the pitfall there is that any one of these areas can become a black hole because you can always go deeper and you can always find more things. And so part of being an effective researcher is developing the judgment about what to prioritize and when to stop digging, or which leads are worth following up and digging deeper on and which ones are best left alone. So if you're going down the rabbit hole in someone, you should really take a step back and think back to these questions. Is what you're finding helping answer these questions? If yes, then great, it's worth sort of digging deeper, doing the next cut. But if not, then you should stop, right? It's one of those things where you just need to use your judgment on when the right time to do that is. But ultimately these are the key questions we're trying to get at in doing the research, and so let that be your guide. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more kind of about ways that all of us who are presenting on this call are excited about supporting you all in doing this research. And so to kind of help guide you if you're getting stuck down a rabbit hole or you're not finding anything or it's getting frustrating, we really want to be here to help you all figure out this process. And kind of once you've done it a couple of times, you kind of sharpen your instincts and can kind of smell out in a better way what's interesting, what's not, what's worth following up on, and what isn't. So to kind of give you guys a real life example of what it looks like to build out those iterative webs that Saqib and Kevin were talking about, I'm going to go through and show you how I would take one of our target organizations that's called the Abstraction Fund and begin to make a power map about it, and highlight some particular tools that are useful for that. So real quick, so like I said, we're going to be focusing on this group called the Abstraction Fund. And from the research that CARE put together, here's a brief explanation of kind of what the group is and why it's on our list. So it's a national tax-exempt private foundation, which means that it raises money and then gives money out to other nonprofits and think tanks. And it provides financial support to groups promoting anti-Islam bias. The fund is part of the inner core of the U.S. Islamophobia network. That means that it's kind of a key group. It's not just doing Islamophobia promotion as one of many things it does. It's really a core work. And during the 2010 to 2015 period, 5.9 million or 68% of the Abstraction Fund's total grants went to U.S. Islamophobia network groups. Board President Nina Rosenwald's Gatestone Institute is a hub for anti-Muslim ideologies. And then it goes on to list some other groups that they particularly favor in their funding. So for me, like when I'm looking at this, there are a couple of things that are interesting. So one is it's really clear that this is like a core important group that's funding a whole other bigger network of Islamophobia groups. So if we're thinking about kind of good targets for action and what are people that are really calling the shots and have a lot of influence in this space, this seems like as good of a place to start as any because they also have ties to a lot of other groups. And then the other thing that kind of sticks out is they named the board president here, Nina Rosenwald, so that might be an important person for us to understand more about. And the fact that she runs this Gatestone Institute, that kind of puts up a red flag for me as well. So if I'm thinking about doing an initial cut of research on the Abstraction Fund, there's going to be a couple of tools that I'm going to show you all next to just kind of keep your eyes peeled for. So of course, number one research tool is Google. I think sometimes people think that, you know, corporate researchers use a lot of fancy databases, and sometimes that's true, but a lot of it is just Googling and knowing to go past page 1 on Google. So I think you all can do that. GuideStar is another tool we'll talk about that helps you investigate nonprofits. LittleSis, of course, which I talked about a little bit, and Open Secrets, which is an awesome database for looking up federal financial contributions. So I'm going to take you guys back to my online screen real quick. Can you guys see just a Google search page?
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. So the first thing that I'm going to do if I'm interested in power mapping the Abstraction Fund is just Google their name to see kind of what's been going on with them in the news. And so in this case, I'm going to put it in quotes because the words abstraction and fund might be in a bunch of different other things, but I want to make sure those words are together. I'm going to Google that. And it's going to take me to just your basic Google hit page. And I'll just start reading some of these things to get some background information and kind of start understanding who they are. So I might, you know, this is actually the site. The first thing that comes up is that CARE site that I just quoted from. So I might want to, you know, if I hadn't seen that already, look at that and read their description. Again, seeing that this Nina Rosenwald name is popping up and Gatestone Institute is popping up and that they're a really important Islamophobic group. Go down here. There's another link from the IslamoPhobiaNetwork.com. So again, I might be interested in that because I'm interested in their Islamophobia. This site will again kind of give us more information on who they've given money to. And it says here, in March 2012, the William Rosenwald Family Fund liquidated its funds and distributed it to the Alice Rosenwald Fund, Middle Road Foundation, and Abstraction Fund. So it looks like the Abstraction Fund is kind of the redone, newer version of this other fund called the William Rosenwald Family Fund. And I might want to keep reading this. Again, Nina Rosenwald's coming up, daughter of the late William Rosenwald, and termed the sugar mama of anti-Muslim hate. So I might want to follow that link, just start really getting familiar with who this person is. So she seems like a key person, so I'll kind of note that in my head. And then once I've done a little bit of background reading, the first thing I want to do and that we're going to ask folks to do is start identifying who's on the board of these Islamophobic organizations. And the most useful tool for that is the one that I mentioned before, GuideStar. So I'm going to go to guidestar.org. And you can make a free account on GuideStar. Anyone can make an account and log in. Mine's logged in already. And I'm going to use their basic search to search for the abstraction fund. And what GuideStar lets me do is see the Form 990 for nonprofits. So I'm sure a lot of folks on this call, are familiar with nonprofits or work for nonprofits, but any nonprofit organization has to file this form called a 990 with the IRS. And it can be a really useful kind of gold mine of information when it comes to investigating foundations and other nonprofits. So I'm going to click their name here. So this looks like the one I'm looking for. And when I go down here on the right side, there's this little Form 990 button. I'm going to click that, and I'm going to click 2015 because I want to see their most recent 990. And this is going to take me to this kind of wonky looking form, but like I said, it has a lot of useful information. So a couple of key things, one, it has the address of the organization, so you know where it is. And it has a bunch of information about their investments, key contractors that they pay a lot of money. It shows you, if they're a foundation, who they've granted money to, which I'll show you in a second. And then it also will have a list of their board members. And it's sometimes towards the end, so I'm going to go down, keep going. I could read this stuff and see what it is. And I'm going to go down to, in this case, page 29. And it's a little wonky. It has it on the side. You could download it and turn it around. But we see here this name, list of officers, directors, and trustees. So this is what we want. This is the board of trustees for the abstraction fund. And we see here they actually have a pretty small board. There's only 3 people on it. Nina Rosenwald, whose name we've already seen as kind of the front woman of this group. This person, Georgette Galbard, and Joel Czar. So I've identified, okay, this is the board. What I want to do next is add that information to LittleSis, because I think that's an important piece of information that the rest of my kind of fellow volunteer researchers who are working on this project need to know. So to do that, I'm going to go back to littlesis.org. And I'm going to say to myself, what is the entity that I want to add information to? And what I want to add information to is the abstraction fund. I want to say who's on their board of trustees. So I'll search for that. And I'll see that it comes up. So someone's already made a page for the abstraction fund, but there's no information on it. So we want to start adding information to it. So I want to say that we know that Nina Rosenwald is the president and treasurer of this organization. So to do that, I'm going to click this little add relationship button. And now the database is asking me, who do you want to make a link with? Who are you saying the abstraction fund has a relationship with? And in this case, it's Nina Rosenwald. So I'm going to type in her name and then click search. And we can see she's already in the LittleSis database. Someone's already made a page for her and added it to it. So here's her name, brief description. She's the co-chair of the board of American Securities Holding Corporation, granddaughter of one of the founders of Sears Roebuck. And I know that's her in part because some of those other articles I looked at said that she was the granddaughter of the Sears Roebuck titan. So to make a relationship, I'm going to click select. And now basically the database is going to prompt me with a bunch of questions so that I put in all the information it needs. So one of the things it's going to ask me is the relationship category. What kind of relationship does the abstraction fund and Nina Rosenwald have? And if you need a reminder, you can click this button and it'll explain what all the categories mean. In this case, we want to say there's a position. So she has a position at the abstraction fund. She's a trustee. And it's going to ask us, where is this information coming from? And it's coming from the 990 that we found. So I'm going to copy the address of that 990, and then I'm going to name it Abstraction Fund 990. And then I'm going to click Create Relationship. And it's going to ask me some other information. If you have this information, it's good to put in, but you don't necessarily have to if you can't find all of it. But I'm going to say she's the president and treasurer. We know she currently is because that's the most recent 990. And then we're going to click yes, she's a board member, and then click this little update button. And so now what's happened is there's been a link in the database created to show that Nina Rosenwald is the president and treasurer of the abstraction fund. So when I go to the abstraction fund, now Nina Rosenwald comes up as a staff member there as president and trustee. So we've added her, but we know there are also 2 other trustees. And my hunch right now is she's the most important one to look into, but we want to add the other 2 just in case. So there's kind of a couple of tricks to LittleSis where you can add information faster that I'm going to show folks. And again, if you're not following all of this right now, that's totally okay. We'll send you guides and we can show you more later. But if we want to add 2 people or more at a time, I'm going to use this little add bulk button. So I'm going to click add bulk under abstraction fund. And I should note, if you guys go into LittleSis and make an account afterwards and you don't see that button, we might have to add new permissions. So you can just email us. I'll let you guys know how to request that. But so I'm going to do add bulk. And this is going to basically let me add multiple trustees at once, so it goes a lot faster and easier for us. So it's going to ask you, what's the relationship category that you're uploading? So again, it's position. What's our source URL? It's that 990. The name is Abstraction Funds 990. And who's the name of the people who are on the board? So one of them is this guy, Joel. I don't know how you pronounce his last name, but it's ZBAR. So I'm going to say Joel ZBAR. And his name came up here, so that means he's already in the database. So I'm going to click that, partner at Elsner Amper. I could click on it and see to double check, and it's him. I did that before. He's a person. He's currently on the board, and he's a board member. So we're good to go. Then I want to add our second person. So I'm going to click this little green plus mark. That person's name, if I go back here, is Georgette Gelbar. So I'm going to search that. And in this case, their name didn't pop up. So that means that they're not in the database already, but that's totally okay. We can just make them a new profile. They're a person, and they're the same as Joel, board member and current. So I'm going to click then, after I fill that in, upload data, and it says it was successful. So when I go back to the abstraction fund, now Joel and Georgette are also in there as board members. So you can see if you had an organization that had a board of like 15 people, it would be much faster to do it that way than just add them in one by one. But now that I've kind of added in the board and identified them, what I want to do is start digging in on Nina Rosenwald, because she really seems like the key decision maker in this organization. From those things we read, it's her family's money that's going to the organization. She's the president. She's quoted in a lot of the press kind of as their front woman. So I'm going to click her and just I'm curious to see what's already in LittleSis about her. And so in this case, there's actually a fair amount of stuff already in here. And so we'll take a look. She's the co-chair of American Securities Management that's founded by William. We could click that and see what it is. Founded by William Rosenwald to invest and manage his share of his family's fortune. So it seems like some kind of Wall Street financial firm that she's in charge of. So that's kind of interesting if we're thinking about corporate backers of Islamophobia. And then we can see here other positions and membership. She's connected to a ton of different Islamophobic looking groups. And again, we could click on them and see what they all are. But the Gatestone Institute, which we had seen before, Washington Institute for Near East Policy, Middle East Media and Research. She's a former board member at APAC. There's some family members of hers in here, and some groups that she's given money to, groups and politicians she's given money to. So we see there's a fair amount of information in there, but we think there's other stuff out there that could be interesting from her. So I'm going to think about kind of that web that Kevin and Saka put up. And the first kind of category of information we might be interested in is what are her work positions So we know a little bit about that, American Securities Management. So I'm curious if she's on any other corporate boards, as well as her nonprofit positions. Kind of what other groups that are nonprofit, think tanks, charities, etc., is she tied to? And to do that, what I usually do, again, is just a quick Google search for the person's name. And see what starts coming up. And oftentimes, the first couple of hits on a Google page about someone will be, of course, their Wikipedia page, which you can look at and read some more information on them, as well as like their official biography. And that's what this second link is, if I click this. So this is the Gatestone Institute, which we saw is a group that she founded that's on the Islamophobia watch list. And this gives her official biography, which is really useful because it talks about the board she serves on. So she also serves on the boards of Human Rights in China, Middle East Forum, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting, National Committee on American Foreign Policy. She's a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. We can see her Twitter and go check out and see what she's tweeting, because that might let us know what other groups she's tied to. But so we see this information, and some of that wasn't on her LittleSis page, so we'll want to add that. So that's of interest to us. We want to know kind of all the different Islamophobic groups that her money and her presence is felt in. So, for example, it says here that she's on the boards of the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting. And I didn't see that on her LittleSis page, I don't think. So I want to add that in. I'm going to show that again to folks, that process. So I'm going to say add relationship. I want to add a relationship between Nina Rosenwald and the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting. So I'll search for that. There's already a profile for them in LittleSis, so great, can select that. I want to say she has a position. For the source link, I'm going to use her biography, copy and paste the URL, Gatestone biography, and then click create relationship. And I'm going to say she's a trustee. Current, she's a board member, and click update. So now when I go to Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting, we can see that she's listed as a trustee. And then the kind of interesting thing too is if we go down, we can see where it says list here. That organization was actually on that initial list of 45 of Islamophobic organizations. So you can see this is an example of why LittleSis is really useful for that, because if I'm researching the Abstraction Fund and someone else is researching the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting, now I've done some work for them and we can start saying, oh, there's actually like a person linking those two groups together, and that's useful to know. So we can, keep adding more information like that to LittleSis. The other thing that's kind of useful in identifying board membership is using a kind of a Google trick that's doing an in URL search. So the way that works is it's a little operator for Google. So if I want to bring up web pages that has Nina Rosenwald's name and the word board in its URL, I can type in URL :board, and then again I'll put her name in quote Nina Rosenwald and click search. And this sometimes brings up some more like things that maybe they're not as like openly talking about, or they don't think are as prominent of their board membership. So it'll bring up some other things. So the one that is interesting is, I don't know, she's on the board of this International Center of Photography. So we can click that, which seems to be just like, I looked at it a little bit before, and it's kind of just like a arts organization. And we can see she's an honorary trustee. So that might be something we would want to add to LittleSis as kind of an interesting connection there. For her in particular, like, she doesn't seem like she still has any recent connections with Sears Roebuck. Her family's kind of out of that, but that would want to be something we could look into. We could see, does Fortune magazine or Forbes, have they written anything about the Rosenwald family? Kind of that kind of business reporting is also really useful. So that's kind of how you can keep figuring out what the board relationships are. And you can see, like, once you find one good source, there usually will be multiple things on that you'll want to add to the database to kind of build out their profile, and it'll lead you to other organizations, and you kind of start going through a chain that way. One of the other categories that was highlighted in that web was philanthropy. So in this case, we already know she has one fund that she's related to, this abstraction fund. And if we want to understand who the abstraction fund gives money to, we can return to that 990 again. So in general, if I use GuideStar to find this, usually at the very end of it, there'll be a page that says grantees or grants. This one's a little small in the text, I apologize, but it'll show you a list of where her fund gave money to and how much. And so we can look through this and see what kind of groups she's giving money to. A lot of groups that if we added them in would be on our Islamophobia list. She's giving to the Jewish community centers. She's giving to the Manhattan Institute, which is, again, is a big right-wing think tank with a lot of connections to kind of Wall Street and financiers and bankers. She gave to the Police Athletic League. She gave to something called Turning Point USA. So we could start looking at these and say, you know, what's interesting about these? What are all these different groups? And also keep a lookout for kind of more like mainstream charities that she might be giving to, or arts organizations or civic groups where there could be some pressure to be put. So for example, like in the process of doing this research, when I was looking on her LittleSis page, I saw she had a sister who also has ties to Islamophobic groups, this woman, Elizabeth Beret, who's also on the board of Central Park. So I could imagine there being interesting things done about like connections between why is Central Park allowing this like backer of Islamophobia on their board. So that's how you would find some philanthropic giving. The last category of information we're going to focus on is political giving. So the kind of go-to website for this, for investigating corporations and wealthy people's political giving at the federal level, is opensecrets.org. So I'm going to go there. And again, I'm just going to go to this little search bar and I'm going to type in her name. And then I'm going to want to go to this little button that says donors, because we want to know what her profile as a donor is. And the way that it's organized now, there's 300 records. That's really a lot. And it's all of the dates that she's given. So starting back, it looks like in 2005. But I want to know, if I'm just curious, maybe what she gave in the last election cycle. I'll go to this advanced donor lookup, search her name again, and then go to the 2016 cycle. And you can pick some of the other categories too, but in this case, we'll search. And so I can start taking a look at who she gave money to. You know, some looks like mostly Republicans, representatives, senators, $1,000 to Ben Carson. Some of this bigger giving gets to these super PACs. So she gave $20,000 to a John Bolton super PAC that we could look up again in the search bar of Open Secrets and see who they gave money to. So if we're like, oh, that's interesting, she gave $20,000 to that, then I could go up here and say, what's the John Bolton super PAC? Go to organization, click this first one here, and see that it's a super PAC. This committee is a super PAC that's spent in the last election. And if I go to independent expenditures, I can see what candidates they spent for. So it looks like they were spending against some Democratic senators, spending for some Republicans. So that's one way to look at federal giving. The other way is LittleSis has kind of a handy way of doing that, because Open Secrets and LittleSis have reciprocity between each other. So if I Google, or if I search in LittleSis Nina Rosenwald again, there will be this little button that says match donations here. And I want to click that, and it's going to link up with information from Open Secrets, so that information will be pulled automatically into the LittleSis database. So I'm going to say select all, because this all looks like it's her, because we know she's in New York, Rosenwald Family Associates, and we'll start adding in that information. Gatestone Institute, and we can keep doing that for all of these records that are showing up. And then I'm going to click Match Selected, and this little gear is going to go. That shows that it's working on basically pulling in the info from Open Secret. So then when I click her profile, all of that information is now in this donation and grant recipient section. So we could click See All and see who she's giving to. And there's also a way using this data tab, if we want to see like, oh, has she given to Marco Rubio? You can click the data tab, search, and that should bring up, it might still be pulling in, but that should bring up kind of if she's given to him, but it might still be importing the information. There's also this political tab, which we can talk about later, that shows you kind of the big picture breakdown of the money that she's given. So that's a little bit about kind of 4 useful tools for beginning to map out their power network. And again, kind of once you start messing around with it and digging in and kind of learning the tools and learning what's useful and not, it kind of becomes second nature and can help you figure it out. But I'm gonna throw it back over to Saqib to kind of give us a little bit of like a wrap up of why we want that information, how we can kind of apply it to campaigning.
Great, thanks, Molly. That was really helpful. So, Molly really gave us like a deep dive in some of what some of this research looks like. So just to zoom out a little bit and think about how this connects, Molly, we can see your email.
Sorry, guys.
Just to think about how this connects and how we might use some of this in a campaign, right? Because often when we get deep into research, we can lose sight of the bigger picture thing that we're trying to do. So I want to just talk you through a couple of examples of what campaigning around some of this research might look like. So first, there's this fact that Molly mentioned that that Nina Rosenwald is the heiress of the Sears Roebuck fortune. It's unclear at this point whether or not there are still connections between her and the company. We wouldn't find anything obvious, but there might be. Well, if there were, that's definitely a point of entry because, among other things, I mean, there's so many things here, but one thing to make a direct connection between some of the different strands of research that Molly laid out. Rosenwald was one of the founding members of the Board of Regents for the Center for Security Policy, which is a think tank that helped shape Trump's Muslim ban. And so, it begs the question, well, does Sears support the Muslim ban, right? You can run a whole campaign calling on Sears to renounce the Muslim ban and sever any ties with Rosenwald. Sears has a lot of Muslim and immigrant customers, and the company is already struggling. They really can't afford a whole lot of bad PR hits around this. And so we can think about, a next step in research is figuring out what are those connections, but then really thinking about some of the ways that we could leverage those connections and Sears' vulnerability to put pressure on Rosenwald. The other thing we know about Rosenwald is that she has a hedge fund. So there's a question, a few questions that come to my mind. One is, which pension funds are invested in her hedge funds? Do those pension funds include a lot of members who are Muslims or immigrants? Can we get Muslim retirees to demand that their pension fund stop investing in her hedge fund? What else is her hedge fund invested in? Are they invested in, which companies are they invested in? Do any of those companies have a vulnerable brand? Right? Do they target Muslim immigrant customers? And are any of them good targets for a boycott? What issues does her hedge fund or any of the companies that they're invested in lobby around? Who else has a fight with those companies? But digging in deeper on these issues, depending on what we find, we can really put together an intersectional campaign plan around the hedge fund that can include boycotts, divestment, naming and shaming, and a host of other tactics. The other thing that I just looked at very quickly while just noticed right now when Molly turned to her sister. So this is an interesting thing, which is her sister, who is also on the board of her hedge fund. Right. What's interesting is she's on the board of El Pollo Loco, which has a very public brand, right? That is a very public brand that is aimed towards immigrants, or not immigrants. I mean, it's not really aimed towards immigrants at all. It's aimed at white people, but at least it has some sort of, I mean, El Pollo Loco, right? I mean, there's something there, right? But you can imagine sort of a campaign that shines spotlight on El Pollo Loco, saying, you know, sever your ties, kick this person off your board. The other thing is she's also looking at, she's also on the board of the United Jewish Appeal, Federation of Jewish Philanthropies of New York. What's interesting about that is some of these, and the other thing is she's also, based on her political giving, she's a Democrat, is what it seems like, or she gives to a lot of Democrats. So both of those things are important, because if you were to look at, you know, those two facts, like, she probably doesn't actually see her image as being wrapped up in Islamophobia, right? If she's a Democrat, I'm guessing that this is you know, Nina Rosenwald's sister, who's also on the board of the hedge fund that Nina Rosenwald runs, right? So it's like, so the fact that, yeah, the fact that she's a Democrat means she's probably, she might not want to be associated with that stuff. But the other thing is this, the Federation of Jewish Philanthropies, I mean, I don't know much about them, but I'm guessing they also wouldn't want to be associated with the Muslim ban or any of these things. And if we were to look at who are the, you know, who does that foundation give money to, like who are their recipients, they probably also would not want to be associated with this. So this makes for an interesting thing, because we do have, you know, there are strong connections between Nina Rosenwald and her sister, and it just seems like there probably is a way here to sort of divide the two of those, right? Like to sort of divide and conquer there, and to figure out how you put pressure on her sister, who is also a business associate of hers, in order to put pressure on her. And how do you sort of use her sister's network? And I would just sort of point out that, like, this piece about her sister, I literally, like, just noticed that right now with, like, 30 seconds of clicking around the LittleSis website when Molly was going through it. So I just think, I want to go back to this question of this is why I think LittleSis is really, really important and such a helpful tool to use this stuff, because there's all this information that's already there, that sort of, and that it's just be a great way to really figure out, like, how you can pull the strand. Like I mentioned, that research is an iterative process where, like, you start one place, but then with each of those things, you want to sort of branch out and see what builds from there. And this is a perfect example of that, like, where LittleSis makes it so much easier to do that because the links are right there. And as you're doing the research, as you add more information, it also makes it accessible for other people. Yeah, that's just to give you guys an example of, like, what we might do with some of this research. So it seems to me like, yeah, the three key things just initially that I would look at. One would be looking deeper on, are the connections with Sears that makes the Sears brand vulnerable. Secondly, you know, all the different things the hedge fund is invested in, like, what are opportunities around that? And the third thing is, how do we sort of cause a fissure between her and her sister, based on the fact that her sister seems to have a different image of herself.
Cool.
So, I mean, having sort of in the home stretch over here, so having heard about all this, thank you everyone for listening for a long time. We have a question for you guys, which is, you know, who's interested in being part of a grassroots research team? So what we'd like to do is ask folks to sign up to research 2 or 3 organizations over the next month or so. These are organizations that were on the list that Molly and Kevin walked through earlier. And so, Molly, I don't actually know how the poll works. Is it that, does the poll question show up on their screen, or?
Yeah, Christiane is gonna press some buttons, and then there'll be a box that pops up in front of people asking you if you're interested in joining this grassroots research team, and you can click yes or no things.
Yes, so yes, so please take a second to do that. We really hope that, you know, we'd love to figure out how we build up the research capacity around this. And so we're also mindful of the fact that Ramadan starts this weekend, and that means that people will be, you know, that a lot of folks will start getting busy, but we will sort of work around that. So don't let that be a limiting factor, but yeah, it'd be great if folks can sign up to do this. So yeah, if we can pose the question, that would be great. And people can just respond in the poll using your computers.
We'll wait a couple more seconds to make sure people don't respond. Cool. Christiane, are we good on the poll?
Yep, we're good.
Cool.
Great, thanks. Molly, I'm gonna turn it back to you.
Cool, thanks. So for those of you who are interested in kind of joining in on this project, and even if you're feeling like that was a lot of information to absorb and it was overwhelming, don't worry, because we're going to break it down into like easy steps for you all, and we have a lot of resources that can help you. So for those of you who said you're interested in taking a target or two to research, we'll be following up and kind of handing out assignments of which groups we're asking for you to look into. And we'll basically be asking you to take that group and start building out its profile in LittleSis by doing kind of what I just did for the abstraction fund. So adding their board members to their profile and beginning to identify some of those key relationships like board memberships, nonprofit memberships, family members, other Islamophobic groups that they're giving money to, etc. Between now and our next call. And we'll share you all in a Google Drive that has those assignments, that also has a research guide that walks you through step by step what we showed you guys tonight, as well as some documents where you can just kind of dump some notes. So those resources will be available for you. And then the other thing is that we at LittleSis and SOCUB and Eden are available to help you guys puzzle through this and answer questions. And one of the ways we're going to be doing that is within LittleSis, there's like a chat system. So you can set up like a private chat room, basically. We're going to set one up for this group so that when you're online doing research, you can just ask questions there. And then either us or other people who are also doing research on this project can answer your questions. We can troubleshoot together. We can work through together. If you're feeling like you don't know where to start, we can help you get started, all that good stuff. So as long as you responded to the poll question and registered for the call, you'll get all of that information coming up. Which brings us to our last question about a next call that SOCUB's gonna share some details about.
Sure, so thanks, Molly. So we want to schedule our next call, but again, we want to be mindful of the fact that Ramadan starts this weekend and people are going to be busy. So we have a proposal to do a call on June 17th in the afternoon at 2 Central, which would be a training and check-in call. The idea is that we will do a short training on how to research funders of organizations. So the same way that today we focused on how do you research board members, we want to do a training to research funders of organizations, and then also to give you all a chance to report back on how things are going, flag issues, and ask questions. We don't expect folks to have completed the research by then, but it'd be good if you've done enough work to get a sense of how it's going. But so the question is, does it make sense to do the call on June 17th if we have it as a sort of training, a check-in call, or would you rather we wait until after Ramadan ends, which would be the last week of June or July? So there should be a question on your screen, which is, would you be comfortable sort of doing the call on June 17th to keep the ball rolling, or would you rather that we wait until after Ramadan ends? So please take a second to answer the question. Great. Are we good, Christiane? Or?
Let's have we need a few more minutes, or about 30 more seconds.
Thanks.
Cool. Are we good?
We're still getting a few more responses, so I'll keep it up for about 15 more seconds. Yeah.
Cool. And then before we close out, I meant to do this a little earlier, but I I don't think there are any lingering questions in the chat channel, but if you have a question that you'd like to ask us, feel free to raise your hand and Christiane can unmute you and we can try to answer it to the best of our ability. So if you have any questions before we jump off, feel free to raise your hand right now.
Molly, we had one question from Noor who asked, what timeline are we hoping to start and complete the research?
Great question. Saka, do you want to talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so
Or
what
should
we'd
I?
like is, so I can start. So what we'd like is, as I mentioned earlier, that actually, do we have a sense of what did people say to the poll question on timeline?
So about 78% of folks said that, I'm sorry, that's actually about half of the folks said that they're willing to hop on a call on June 17th. So we're pretty split on that.
Okay, so I think what might be good is, well, I guess we'll make a decision around that, but it seems like maybe in any case, whether we do the training component or not, it seems like we probably it would be good to do a check-in call around that, and so that folks have issues, things are coming up. If you want to get on, you can. So I think what'd be great is, again, we think this is about, they understand that people are doing this in their free time, after work and so forth. That to get started with 2 or 3 organizations, it's probably about like a month's worth of work if it's done as like 5-10 hours a week. And so in other words, it's probably about like 30-40 hours worth of work. So what I would say is, it'd be great if folks can at least get started on this enough so that if we have some sort of a check-in call on the 17th, that you have enough of a sense of how's it going, are there issues that are coming up, are there, so that you can actually, if there's issues, you can flag them and we can sort of talk through them together, because chances are whatever issues you're having, others are having them too. And so I think it'd be good if folks at least start getting this underway, but maybe we'll try to pull together to try to actually have this research done sometime by like early July. But we can follow up with a tighter timeline.
Yeah. And just so folks know, in terms of the research, like Saka said, we're starting with board members, and then the next time we talk, we'll show people how to identify funders. Because for some of these groups, maybe they don't have like a clear corporate connection on their board, but they're getting money from corporations. And so then we'll have people map that out and then keep staff. So it'll be building as we go along.
And the other thing, as Kevin sort of alluded to earlier, that what you'll find is that it'll vary greatly from organization to organization. Like there might be some organizations where you realize there's just not much there, right? That there's not much information, it's not much publicly available. And so actually that might take you an hour to realize, oh, this is a complete dead end. And so that's why we're giving everyone sort of asking folks to do 2 or 3, so that the idea is that chances are, and if you have 2 or 3, there's a good chance you'll find at least one where there is enough information to sort of dig in on, and you'll probably find at least one that's a dud. And so but it should sort of balance out.
Cool. Any other questions, Christiane, on the back end?
There aren't any questions in the chat box, but if folks would like to raise their hand, please take the opportunity to do so. All right, I'm not seeing anything on this end.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for everyone for sticking with us for an hour and a half on a weeknight. We really appreciate it, and we're really excited to dig in on this with you. I don't know if Saka or Eden, do you want to say any last words?
Oh, this is really exciting. Looking forward to seeing what folks find.
Cool. All right, well, thanks everyone, and we'll be following up over email with all of those resources and next steps.